Back. I'd like to begin this second session, which I have entitled Living in Trust While Acknowledging Our Fears. Poetry is the realm of those women and men who have the capacity to name in picture words what all of us know to be true. It's a way of handling on the wisdom of a culture or of a people, a family. And so I'd like to begin with a poem by a woman named Anna Akhmatova entitled Everything is Plundered. Everything is plundered, betrayed, sold. Death's great black wing scrapes the air. Misery gnaws to the bone. Why then do we not despair? By day from the surrounding woods, cherries blow summer into town. At night, the deep transparent skies glitter with new galaxies. And the miraculous comes so close to the ruined, dirty houses, something not known to anyone at all, but wild in our breast for centuries. Indeed, in poetic form, she is named the signs of our times. How is it we're able to live with both? We know beauty, we know goodness, we've experienced incredible opportunities, and yet, boy, this time of endarkenment is pretty overwhelming. There's a lot to be afraid of, a lot to be concerned about. Economic situation, people's health, well-being, death of friends and loved ones. This new normal is not an enjoyable place to be in. But this is the reality that's been given to us. And so we're invited to live in this reality. But here's the real challenge. To live while thriving with a positive experience of trust. A trust in a hidden God. A trust in a love that's beyond our wildest dreams. Oh, trust. Oh boy, that's a tough one. Because it goes back to our own childhood and how well we trusted or didn't. There's a lovely story told about a bishop who wanted to keep a newly ordained priest close to him, to keep an eye on him, and to make sure that he did well. He had plans for this young man. And so the new priest had been at the cathedral for about 4 weeks. And finally the bishop said, "Okay, son, I'd like you to preach at the main mass, and that will be in 2 days." Well, of course, immediately the young priest was just petrified. "Bishop, I don't have the skills. That you do much better." "Well, that may be so, but I want to see how you do in front of a large audience." "Well, what am I supposed to do?" He says, "Well, prepare and then just trust the Lord." So the priest was just worrying all night and day what to do, and so he decided to go down to the library there in the rectory, and he began looking through different books, and he came across this one book, and lo and behold, there were some notes inside it. And the notes were really good about the material, and just so happened that they were a type of notes that could help him put together his own homily. So he had the first Mass, and the bishop had the Mass after him. So the bishop wanted to listen in on his homily, and he recognized exactly what the priest was preaching about, because the priest had found the bishop's homily notes. And so the bishop came up to him very frustrated and angry with the young priest and said, "What in the world were you doing?" He said, "I did exactly what you did. I told me. I prepared, I trusted, and I gave what I found. But those are my notes. What am I supposed to do now?" And the young priest smiled and said, "Bishop, I think you should just trust the Lord and you'll be fine." It's a lot easier to tell people, "Oh, just trust and everything will be fine." But we're in the situation, we're riddled with all sorts of self-doubt, anxious musings about, well, how's it going to come across? How am I going to do? Oh, that's a great question. Not only for ourselves, but for life. Once again, as we look to the scriptures in the life of Jesus, we see that Jesus found God in the midst of disorder, chaos, and imperfection. And so must we. If we don't, then we will never be centered on this earth. will forever be seeking ways out and around. What if we were to look at life with a different metaphor? Rather than feeling like a victim, now look what's happened to me, what if we were to look at life as a great adventure? As a combination of various themes that come to invite us into a depth and a fullness and a richness that's beyond our wildest dreams. You see, most of us have less faith in ourselves than God does. God has lots of faith, deep confidence in you that you'll be fine. Why? Because God has given you God's own Spirit. But realistically, let's look at the situation we find ourselves in 2020. As we look to the Bible for a metaphor that might hold the container of our many different feelings and thoughts and concerns, I believe the metaphor that best speaks to it is the metaphor of the exile. The exile was a very seminal experience for the Hebrew people. You see, they had lost all security. They had lost their land, they had lost their king, and they lost their temple. They were experiencing utter and complete insecurity. And this is why the prophets of old continued to invite them to trust the Lord. Even though it didn't seem like there was anything to trust, everything had been taken from them. So the message of God is still the same, that we are to trust in the unknown, the unseen, but not the unexperienced. Let me say it to you this way. The gift is already given. The gift that we most deeply yearn as human beings, and that is the gift of union. But rather than union, most of us settle for seeking and searching for predictability, explanation, and order to give ourselves some sense of pseudo-peace and control. And yet, that is not the gift that God desires for us. God invites us to wake up to the already present reality that you and I are in God, as God is in us. True spirituality is not a search for control, perfection, or the door to the next world. It's not about escaping reality. No. It is about a deeper immersion in the present reality. It is a search for the divine union now. Think how many times that Jesus said, the reign of God is here. The reign of God is in your midst. And notice how often he used metaphors that were very small. The reign of God is like a seed. The reign of God is like a mustard tree. On and on. What does that mean for us? It means the reign of God slowly sneaks up on us. It slowly unfolds. That Jesus, like God, is found in disorder, in imperfection, and so must we. St. Teresa of Avila, doctor of the church, said it beautifully. She said, you find God in yourself, and yourself in God. There's this wonderful back and forth relationship. To recognize that we must go deep into what is. Not to be lost in it, but to be found in it. Many years ago, when I was a newly ordained priest, I was offering a weekly Bible study on Friday evenings. And it was a cold winter evening, and I had my big heavy jacket on. I was walking over the rectory with one of the members of the parish who were carrying some of my equipment, my guitar, Bible. I was carrying a couple things as well. And we got to the front porch, and I just put the key in the doorknob when I felt an arm come around my midsection, and a strong male voice in my ear says, give me all your money. At that time, much of my ministry was around caring for youth and young people. So I thought it was a practical joke, but I turned to my side and I looked into a man who was taller than me. He was obviously high on drugs. So I put my hands up and I said, I don't have my wallet. And he looked back. Back then I had a small calendar that looked like a wallet. He said, what about that? I said, you can have it. Okay, so I gave it to him. The woman behind me had opened up her purse and was waving some money and telling the man to leave me alone. And so off he went. He took the money and took my calendar, and off he went. Those of you who've been victimized, you would recognize the feeling. For the next 36 hours or so, I was not myself. Inside felt like jello. And I couldn't really name what was going on. And then what really frightened me is about 36 hours later, I was called off-site to go and anoint someone, and I had to use the freeway. And when I came back from the anointing, there was a still voice that said to me, why don't you just end it all? Just turn the steering wheel into the center divider. Well, that really frightened me, and so I very cautiously drove home. I went immediately to my room and I sat down. I said, Lord, I give up. Your word says, perfect love casts out all fear. I give you this fear, this anxiety that has me in its grip, and I ask you to replace it with your perfect love. As sure as I'm standing here, that fear went whoosh, like wind just went right out of me, and I just felt utter and complete peace. I then got up and I called the woman who had come with me to the front door, and I said, how are you doing? She said, not good. I haven't been able to sleep. I told her what happened to me. I said, try it. Same thing worked for her. You know, so often for many of us, especially as Catholics, we have the Bible, we all have a Bible, but we store it in the bookshelf, or we use it as record keeper. But it's hard for us to put it into practice. Jesus meant what he said. Perfect love casts out all fear. And why so often he talked about don't live in fear. So when you're feeling fear, especially in a particular circumstance, acknowledge it. Acknowledge the fear. But trust and know that God's love is greater than your fear. And God wants to set you free from being enslaved, imprisoned because of that fear. We can trust the unknown, the unseen, because we know that God loves us and is within us in all situations. Read John's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 7. You'll see what I mean. Try living with a beginner's mind, or the mind of a child, to look at all of life as if it's the first experience, the only experience, the last experience. It's amazing how deeply felt or experienced it can move us to conversion, to see and to know in a completely different way. Those of you who are grandparents, you know this to be true, is that you're not only invited into, you experience what your grown children tease you as saying a second childhood with your grandchildren, because you're beginning to see the little bugs or the colors of the sky or a tree or a bush or music or dance in a whole different way. And thank God for that. Isn't it any wonder that it's God who's inviting you through your grandchildren, or through your children, or through other people to do the same? The lesson of the cross of Jesus Christ is nothing less than this. To experience the divine is to rest fully in God's love while we have an experience of the cross. It's an experience of inner freedom and liberation, even in suffering, sickness, and death. My mother was on her deathbed. I knew at one time she truly loved the rosary. She had taught us children, and we'd pray it together in the front room every evening in the month of May and October. And she was coming in and out of consciousness after having suffered what we believe was a stroke. And I said, Mom, would you like to pray the rosary? And she just nodded. I said, do you remember how to do that? She said, yes, I've prayed it every day of my life. That was quite a revelation. And so we began to pray, and then of course she lost consciousness again. But just that moment was such an insight for me that sometimes in the times of darkness we go back to the things that have served us, excuse me, sometimes for years, is that we lean in to those foundational experiences of prayer, of sacrifice, of hope, of belief. And that is how it should be. Because you see, faith is more about how to believe than what to believe. It's about standing on something that you know is strong and can hold you. When I was going through a very dark and depressing time in my own life, the two things that helped me were centering prayer and jogging. That depression lasted about 6 months. But those two gifts served me. They were like handholds going down in the basement of my life, or what the great mythologists would say, going into the underworld. What helps you when you feel overwhelmed by your fears, your darkness, your insecurities, your self-doubt? This is why the church, for centuries, has encouraged each of us to find spiritual practices or exercises, prayer forms that can sustain us in these times of darkness. Don't use things that are outmoded, that don't fit you. Use the very things that help you individually. When religious leaders, parents, loved ones teach us different things, it may be just fine for that time. But is it large enough to contain what you're going through right now? If not, seek the insight and the wisdom of other members of the faith community who can offer you their own perception. The mature believer has a deeper way of knowing reality through great love and great suffering. Therefore, this way of trusting, this way of faithing that I'm recommending to you is open to everyone. This is the way of encouragement and solidarity with others. God is with you, I promise you that. And yet God is not going to shortchange you. God is using every detail of your life to help you to experience the authenticity of your own unique humanity. And so God would not be God if God were to take it all from you. Let me say it to you theologically. As we read the scriptures, we reflect upon the Christian faith, we notice that God is not so much a rescuing God as a redeeming God. In other words, just because you say, God, get me out of this, save me, God doesn't pull you out of it. Rather, God gives you the wherewithal to face it. And sometimes it comes in the oddest forms. To recognize that the redemptive quality comes later. Let me give you an example. Years ago, with a group of well-educated men, we had agreed to spend 2 weeks with Youth at Risk. And we took a number of young men. They were all in their teens. All had been abused by life and were in terrible situations, their families. And so we took them up to Canada for canoeing and all sorts of wonderful hiking experiences, and used that as a wonderful base to share with them lessons of life that they could unpack themselves, so that they didn't live as victims but could see the opportunity for them to grow and mature into their own unique manhood. Anyways, one day we were getting ready to get the boys into the canoes, and we were going to have to portage the canoes during part of the trip, which means to carry the canoe. Typically the canoe would be carried by 2 men, but we were going to have the boys practice and have it do them by themselves. There was this one tall young man, 19 years of age. He's about this tall. He kept standing there, and his father happened to be one of the team. And his dad was being very impatient with him. And he couldn't understand why his son was refusing to pick it up. And he said, listen, every one of the boys has done this. It's your turn now. In his frustration, his father began to swear. And he turned to me and he says, you do it. So I went up to him and I called him by name. And I said, you know, I believe in you. I know you can do this. And he's crying by now. And he said, I've never lifted anything this heavy before. I said, you're not alone. We're not going to carry it for you, but we'll cheer you on. And he had never heard me swear before, and all I uttered was one swear word. And he looked at me, and he bent down, and he picked it up, and he carried it single-handedly all the way around the track we'd set up. And we were cheering the entire way. And when he finally put it down, everybody left and started getting ready to get on the river. He turned to me and said, did I really do that? I said, yes, you did. He said, I never thought I could do that. I said, that's why you were stuck. You thought you could never do it, and therefore you couldn't do it. You see, that's where we lean in to God's faith in us. Maybe you've never done such and such. You've never been in a situation where you're in isolation. You've never been in a situation where you're out of work. Never been in the list goes on and on. But God has faith in you. And faith in the unfolding of God's plan for you and for all of us. The second part is God is a God of redemption. Notice when Jesus begged the Father, "Take this cup from me. I don't want to do this." Did God do it? No. No. Why do you think God's going to do that for you? He didn't even do it for Jesus. Jesus is our model. God redeems us, and what that means is that usually through hindsight, it's after the fact we realize, wow, we did that together. It's God's faith in you, God's hope in you, God's belief in you, God standing with you. It's in that redeeming quality that God does that with and for all of us. So, how sad it is that our home is in Jesus now, but instead we have chosen to take out a second mortgage in the house of fear. Time and time again, the prophets remind us, don't dwell in fear. Of course, you're going to have fear from time to time, but how can you hold that paradox? I'm a person of faith, and yet I have these fearful tendencies, these anxious thoughts, this worrying. Well, that is a task for all of us, to be able to unpack that great mystery. So, the goal of maturity is not to do away with our fears. Oh, no. But to learn to be wisely, responsibly, and productively afraid. I know that sounds funny, but I mean that. Let me repeat it. That the goal of maturity is not to do away with our fears, but rather to learn how to be wisely, responsibly, and productively afraid. And here are 4 ways we can do that. First, increase the information. Learn more about the particular danger. Another way to say it is get the right facts. It doesn't help to listen to the same person or listen to the same set of news or the same situation over and over and over again. Just get the right facts. Get the right information. This will begin to assuage your intellectual understanding. Secondly, increase your power. Did you hear that? Increase your power. How do you do that? Well, you reframe the dangers into challenges. Perhaps that means changing a particular life discipline. When I first was learning how to rock climb, and I was told that I was to lean backwards over the cliff as I was being held by a rope by somebody else, I thought, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm looking down hundreds of feet. I could fall. Yes, that's certainly a possibility. But what helped me is to reframe the fear into a challenge. Can I trust my feet? Can I trust this moment? Can I trust the person holding the rope? All those help me to reframe my fear of falling. Third, increase your support. Network with others who are positive, supportive, helpful. Keep in mind the story of the young man carrying the canoe on his head. And finally, befriend mystery. You don't know everything. You're not going to get everything that you need necessarily. So this is about embracing a robust vulnerability, your own fragility. It's choosing to let go of control and to put that in the hands of God. I've learned from the time as a teenager that to trust in the Lord is to become like a mountain. Look it up yourself, Psalm 125, verse 1. They who trust in the Lord are like Mount Zion, which is strong and immovable. That one sentence has served me well throughout my life. We live in trust while holding the paradoxical tension of acknowledging our fears and knowing at the same time we're held by God. God says, I will never abandon you. Yes, you'll be in pain. Yes, there are times you feel like you're being crucified by the situation. Yes, it'll feel very dark. Yes. but I will never let you go. Wow, that's quite a promise. So how did Jesus do it? I'd like to leave you with something that's really helped me. So often as we read the scriptures, we have to turn to scripture scholars to help unpack what exactly is being said. What do we put our focus on? We turn to theologians as they offer us perspectives of the theological underpinnings of the scriptures. So here is a way of unpacking the spirituality of Jesus as you put together the pieces of the gospel stories about Jesus. There are 4 aspects. Jesus' spirituality was one of kenosis. Kenosis. It's a Greek word that means a self-emptying. Here was the Son of God living his life as a human being, fully alive, and yet he emptied himself. He lived as an ungodded person. Yes, he knew limitations like we have as human beings. Here's a great line, and that is from a book called Jesus Before Christianity. It's a classic. It's one that really changed my life. I highly recommend you read it. It's a great line in there by the author. He said, Jesus discovered his divinity in the transcendent depths of his humanity, and so it is for us. Wow. I read that one sentence 3 times. And I thought, is it possible? Yes, I promise you it is. And so it is for us. When you go deep inside your own unique humanity, you discover yourself, the seed of God's divinity within you. That's why Jesus emptied himself over and over again for others. Because that was God's plan for him, and it's the same plan for us. That in the emptying, what's left is God. We slowly discover through our experience it's not about me, it's about God. Secondly, Jesus' spirituality was one of abundance. In other words, because he knew he was love, because he stood in that love, because he heard in the day of his baptism, "This is my beloved in whom I'm well pleased," he believed it. He lived it from the inside out. Because he heard that affirmation of his own blessed nature, wherever he looked, he was blessed. And that's why the Christian commandments called Beatitudes. Why Jesus said some crazy things like, "Blessed are those who are pure in spirit. Blessed are those who weep," and on and on. Because he knew from the perspective of God, all is gift. Wow. What a challenge for us to put that into practice. And why it takes much prayer and reflection to come to that mystical place of saying, I see and I think I can begin to understand. Third, Jesus' spirituality involved a singleness of purpose, a focus on that which is lasting. He called that the reign of God, or the kingdom of God. This is an important thing to remind us of. You know as I do, when you focus on 5 things at once, none of them are done well. That distractions truly become onerous for us. They do not allow us to be able to truly be present in the moment. We get lost in all sorts of diffusive temptations. So to focus on the one task, to focus on the one person or conversation, to focus on the beauty of this moment, at the same time to focus on the tragedy of this moment. That is a gift. It's a gift of discipline that needs to be practiced. To name what it is one is truly feeling, while at the same time to name the fact that, and yet I would trust in the Lord. There's a lovely story told about Virginia, 75-year-old psychologist who was on a wilderness retreat with me and many, many other people. And the retreat facilitator wanted us to do what they call a ropes course. Now, for those of you who are much younger than me, you might remember the ropes course is typically done in a forest. It's a course of moving through about 5 to 7 different stations that necessitate balance and coordination. And typically you do it with a partner. So God bless Virginia. Here this older woman decided, yeah, I'll be willing to do it. And her partner was in her 50s, and they decided they wanted to go first. So first 5 stations, they did fantastic. We were cheering them on from down below. But they came to the last station, and it was a log that was placed parallel to the ground. And Virginia took 3 steps on it, and she was told not to hold the guideline, but just to put her hands out. She was had hooked into the carabiner security line. But then she did the unthinkable. She looked down. Now here was this well-educated, well-seasoned, well-experienced woman. She knew she shouldn't have done that, but she looked down and she froze in absolute terror. No matter what her partner said, no matter what we said from down below, come on, you can do it, she wasn't moving. She lost her focus. So finally, the facilitator said, okay, quiet. He tried to talk her through. She wasn't moving, so he had to climb all the way up, came across the log, and he said, Virginia, look at me. She finally looked up through tear-stained eyes, and she said, I can't do it. He said, yes, you can. I'm going to ask you to do 2 things. Keep your eyes right on my eyes. And I want you to move your feet only when I tell you. Okay, are you ready? He says, I'm going to move my right foot back 6 inches, and I want you to move your left foot forward 6 inches. And that's the way they made it all the way across. That is what Jesus asks of us. He doesn't ask us to climb the whole mountain all at once. He doesn't ask us to finish this job in 3 seconds. He says, will you keep your focus on me? Will you do the little steps with me? I promise you we'll get there. That's what faith does for us. And the last one is transformation. Jesus was all about transformation. Think of life into death and death into life again. Think of the transformation of ordinary bread and wine into his body and blood. Think of the miracles. So it wasn't magic, it wasn't comfort, it was transformation. What he did for others, he asks us to do. To recognize that this is a lifelong work, slowly being transformed into our own essence, into the fullness that God sees us. This is how God sees us. This is how God asks us to grow, to truly become holy and wise and compassionate members of society, especially in this time. And why the Holy Father is calling us to learn and to practice how to be kind and patient with each other, how to get back to the essentials of our faith and what it means to be authentic human beings caring for all people, no matter what our differences are. Yes, indeed, this is a time of great meaning for us. It's a time that draws us into the full embrace of who God is and what God is about. Let me leave you with this final story. It's a story about an old wizened rabbi whose wisdom and holiness was known throughout the whole area. So much so that parents sent their kids to him to learn the lessons of life. One day there was a new student that came into class. It was a 17-year-old young man, and as often happens in nervousness, he sat down and immediately shot his hand up and said, Rabbi, my mom says you're a pretty smart guy. Is that true? Well, all the kids in their nervousness began to laugh, and he said, well, some people think that's true. And he said, Rabbi, my mom says you're a pretty holy guy too. Is that true? Then he laughed and said, only God knows that. Then the boy asked the best question. Rabbi, could you tell us how you became so holy and wise? So the rabbi closed his eyes. He was transported to another time and space. And then he opened them up like a very excited child. And he says, yes, I can. I can tell you the exact day it happened. It was a very hot and humid day in August, many, many years ago. My wife and I were newly married, and we were living in a first-floor tenement flat building in New York City. I had just become a rabbi as well, and so we were excited and all that. And, oh man, I was so glad just to be able to sit in the apartment with the fan going. I was watching television, and my wife came into the room and said, honey, I'm sorry, but I forgot a couple of very important items for the new recipe I'm trying. And could you go down to the local market and get them for me? I didn't want to go out again, and I'd already had 2 showers that day, but I didn't want to upset my new brides. I said, sure, honey, happy to do that. So I got dressed in all of my black clothing, and I opened up the door to that furnace-like heat, and it's like, oh, man. So I decided I didn't want to take another shower, so I was going to walk really slowly to the corner store. As I'm walking, I look up, and it's obvious the fire department's been through earlier in the day, and they'd opened up all the spigots, the fire hydrants, and so there are large pools of water all over the place, and kids up and down the block were playing and laughing and having a great old time, and I was smiling to myself, remembering my own childhood as well. And then off in the distance, I saw this mutt of a dog walking very slowly down the block. Boy, he looked worse than I felt. Then the dog spied a huge puddle of water, and it took off like a shot. It got to the edge of the puddle, and it looked, and it was frightened because it saw the face of this ugly-looking dog, and it got scared and ran away. But the dog was so thirsty, it came back. And again, it saw the same little dog and got scared and ran away. Third time, the dog got smart, came from a different angle, and it decided to do something it hadn't done before. It closed its eyes and jumped right in the middle of the puddle and began to happily lap up the water. The rabbi said to that full classroom of kids, you know, I thought that was the funniest thing I ever saw. I started to laugh so hard my sides were hurting, and then in a moment of awareness I realized, oh my God, that dog is me. That's what I've been doing. Whenever I'd commit a sin, had a failing, did something wrong, I would run to God, but then I would feel my ugliness, the shame of what I had done or didn't do, and I'd run away. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, never allowing myself to look into the eyes of love. That day, through the example of that little mutt, I did what he did. I ran as fast as I could. I closed my eyes and I jumped into God's arms. I've never left. My prayers are for you, my friends. My prayer is that you may do what that rabbi did. Don't wait any longer. In this time of fear and anxiety, darkness and struggle, yes, we're called to acknowledge our fears, but to live in trust. And that means we truly look into the eyes of love. Run as fast as you can, close your eyes, and jump into God's arms. God bless you.